I'm sure that most of you were closely following the Kyle Rittenhouse trial of self-defense, along with millions of other ordinary Americans. And what we learned was probably not what the anti-gun leftists intended for us to learn. Among other things, you see, anyone who paid attention to that trial saw what amounted, in my opinion, to a 2-week infomercial for the personal and social value of the AR-15 rifle. And in my view, due to this infomercial, this de facto infomercial, it may be entirely possible now that this trial will ultimately be responsible for helping to ensure that AR-15 style firearms and rifles will never be banned in the United States, and may ultimately put an end to efforts by the anti-gunners in America to pass so-called assault weapon bans, and may even serve as a powerful basis for the U.S. Supreme Court to ultimately strike down any existing assault weapon related bans in the future. Stay tuned and find out why. Hey folks, I'm Mark and welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. I've got a Joe Biden story for you. Okay, in 2013, when Congress was considering a ban on so-called assault weapons, Joe Biden advised a female questioner the following, quote, "If you want to protect yourself, get a double-barrel shotgun, a 12-gauge shotgun. You don't need an AR-15, it's harder to aim, it's harder to use, and in fact, you don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Buy a shotgun." Joe Biden said that. I kid you not. Those words of self-defense, that sage advice, came straight from the current leader of the free world. Get a double-barreled shotgun if you want a firearm for self-defense. Well, should we all be taking firearms advice from Uncle Joe? Well, I don't think so. But more importantly, though, I think that the last couple weeks, we have witnessed what amounted to a 2-week-long infomercial for the utility, both personal utility and social utility, of the AR-15 rifle as an effective self-defense weapon for defensive purposes. You see, the trial of Rittenhouse showed point by point why Joe Biden's comment about shotguns were dead wrong. I'm talking, of course, about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial and its lessons associated with his use of the AR-15 to protect his life, which is what the jury found. Now ask yourself this question, having watched the trial and the videos associated with that trial. What do we think would have happened if Kyle Rittenhouse had followed Joe Biden's advice about shotguns? Well, first, there's a good chance that Kyle Rittenhouse would be dead. Why is that? That's because, as you know, double-barreled shotguns of the type that Joe Biden was talking about only hold 2 rounds or 2 shells, right? Kyle would have had to reload. Do you think he could have done that on the run? I don't think so. I think it'd be too hard, right? And when Kyle Rittenhouse was knocked down on the ground, he faced, by my count, 3 different attackers. Maybe 4, depending on how you want to measure it, intent on causing him serious harm or death. Plus, there was other members of the mob out there that were ultimately scattered. Second, had Kyle Rittenhouse been carrying a double-barrel shotgun instead of an AR-15 rifle, there's a good chance that he would have killed or wounded innocent bystanders. That's because shotgun pellets, again, going back to Joe Biden's advice, spread out when they exit the barrel of the firearm. In addition, a 12-gauge has a much more robust recoil than an AR-15, and it's much harder to control than an AR-15 as well. So remember, what Joe Biden said to that reporter about an AR-15 being harder to use and harder to aim than a shotgun is really not true. And I think that certainly the AR-15 acquitted itself well in the video in the Rittenhouse trial. Because let me tell you what I thought the video revealed to ordinary Americans, including myself. That is that a 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse with limited firearm training was able to dispatch multiple attackers using an AR-15 while lying on his back. This certainly would suggest that Joe Biden's comment that an AR-15 is not an effective self-defense tool makes no sense. And I should note that it's one of the many, many myths that anti-gunners try to spread about the AR-15 rifle. There's an old adage, as you know, among gun owners and others. That is, you use your handgun to fight your way to your rifle. And why is this? It's because I would say that most gun experts, and I don't consider myself a gun expert, I'm more of a gun law guy than a gun guy specifically. That's because rifles are really considered by most people superior weapons for many reasons. And as America just watched what is essentially 2 weeks worth of evidence proving that the value of the AR-15 and how great it is in color on their television sets, that if you want to protect yourself, a rifle like the AR-15 looks to be a very effective self-defense weapon. And don't believe me or anyone else, just watch the videotape of the Rittenhouse trial, and I think that seems to be a reasonable conclusion based upon the evidence presented at the trial. Now, it's pretty clear that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense, in my opinion, and that, of course, is what the jury found. After all, there was no dispute that Rittenhouse shot 3 people. He killed 2 of them, but the jury still acquitted him of all charges. But if you look at the video evidence, you can see, in my opinion, that Rittenhouse wasn't acting like a violent aggressor would act, right? He was acting more like a potential victim. The video evidence, as I interpreted it, showed clearly that one of the rioters was chasing him and threw something at him, and when you're running away, well, you're really retreating, right? You're not an aggressor, you're in retreat. Okay, that's what Rittenhouse seemed to be doing. And later on, as the mob chased Rittenhouse, he fell to the ground. And that's when an assailant began beating him with a skateboard, and another pulled a gun on him, and another tried to knock him out in the head, as best I could tell from the video evidence. Now, when you're on the ground being beaten and threatened with a weapon, I would say you're not the aggressor. Again, you're the putative or potential victim. Now, what Rittenhouse did that night, as I see it, was really a self-defense exercise, a defensive exercise. And it was the AR-15 that allowed him ultimately to defend himself and his life. The Rittenhouse trial also dispelled another myth about the AR-15 rifle, and that's the myth that the AR is simply an offensive weapon of war designed to be used on a foreign battlefield by our military only, and not as a defensive weapon to be used in the United States by Americans exercising their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Now, you know exactly what I'm saying about this argument here, right, by the anti-gunners. How often have you heard folks like Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and Beto O'Rourke say things like the AR-15 is a weapon of war. The AR-15 has no place on America's streets or in civilian life. Now, of course, based on the Rittenhouse trial, I would say the next time you hear someone say something like this, tell them to take a look at the Kyle Rittenhouse video evidence itself. Then ask them whether or not they still think the AR-15 is not a great gun for self-defense. Because the truth is the AR-15 is arguably a perfect self-defense firearm when you're engaged in a self-defense situation, especially if you're confronting personal dangers arising from mob violence and potential attacks from multiple people. And millions of Americans who already own AR-15 rifles already know this. That's why, this is the reality, the AR-15 is the most popular rifle in America. It's suitable for hunting, for target practice, and of course for self-defense. And by the way, calling or labeling an AR-15 a weapon of war is just another anti-gun propaganda tool designed to persuade the ignorant that don't know anything about firearms at all. Because the truth is, the AR-15 is simply an ordinary civilian weapon that's been around for literally decades. The military uses fully automatic weapons, which is one trigger pull and you keep shooting bullets until you run out of ammunition or you let go of the trigger. In contrast, the AR-15 is a semi-automatic rifle, which is a far cry from what our soldiers use in war. And a semi-automatic rifle, as you know, you pull the trigger once, you fire 1 round of ammunition, and that's how it works in contrast to a fully automatic rifle that the military might use. And again, I should note that the United States Supreme Court has said that under the Second Amendment, when they interpret the Second Amendment, the definition of arms in the Second Amendment, to figure out whether or not arms are protected in the Second Amendment, all you need to do is ask yourself, are the arms commonly used by law-abiding Americans for lawful purposes? That's the test set forth by the Supreme Court itself. And there's no doubt that the AR-15 definitely falls into this protected category of being used by millions of law-abiding Americans for lawful purposes of hunting, of self-defense, and target shooting. It should be a protected arm under the Second Amendment. There's another benefit, in my opinion, that the Rittenhouse trial revealed about the AR-15 rifle, and that is how easy it can be to be used in stressful situations. Look, The reality is most Americans are not trained Navy SEALs. We were not in Delta Force. We're not Army Rangers, right? We were not Marines. At the end of the day, we're truck drivers, we're shopkeepers, we're nurses, we're lawyers, we're doctors, whatever. We're in retail, but we're not special forces, okay? Now, most Americans also don't have the time or even the money. Think about the price of ammo recently to practice shooting firearms all the time, even though we might want to. Now, this is why you really do want an easy-to-use weapon for self-defense purposes, because you never know when you're going to need it. It's like a fire extinguisher. When you need it, you really, really need it, but it's very hard to figure out when you need it. Now, think about the case for a second and what the videotape evidence showed in the Rittenhouse trial. Kyle Rittenhouse was one person, one man, a 17-year-old kid, in fact, facing off against a dangerous mob. Those that attacked Kyle, well, take a look at what they did. One of them had a pistol. One of them had a skateboard. There were definitely some people attacking him. That's what the jury concluded in finding self-defense here. I don't think Rittenhouse had any kind of robust formal weapons training. He had some basic training, I presume, but he didn't have like Navy SEAL training or anything. And yet, despite all this, Rittenhouse was able to use that AR-15 rifle to thwart multiple attackers while he was on his back for part of the time and under direct attack. So to me, this seems like pretty strong evidence that the AR-15 rifle is a pretty effective self-defense tool to me and for others. And I would say the video evidence proves this. And if you don't agree with me or you want to check it out yourself, take a look at the Rittenhouse trial video and ask yourself, does this look like a pretty easy to use weapon for self-defense? And I think you'll find the answer is absolutely yes. The Rittenhouse case shows a fifth reason why the AR-15 works really well for self-defense. It's because it's accurate. You can shoot it accurately. Again, Rittenhouse had little formal training, as best I can tell, on the AR-15. He was under attack at night and feared for his life. That's what the jury found. But still, Rittenhouse managed to hit the people chasing him, right? The perpetrators or the aggressors, according to the jury, right, and their verdict. In fact, if you take a look at what Rittenhouse did, I have to say not only did he hit the people that he was trying to hit, but more importantly, if not equally importantly, is who he did not hit when he shot his gun. And I'm talking about innocent bystanders. Again, that would have been a much tougher feat to pull off had Rittenhouse taken the advice of Joe Biden, right? His recommendation that you should use a double-barrel shotgun for self-defense and not an AR-15. Because again, a shotgun would spray pellets when you fired those shells, when you fired the ammunition, and would have increased the odds of collateral damage of innocent bystanders in a way that the AR-15 used by Kyle Rittenhouse did not. Remember, I think Kyle Rittenhouse, based on the trial evidence that we all watched, this 2-week infomercial I keep saying, Kyle Rittenhouse learned a big reason why the AR-15 is really so popular. And that's because, again, it's accuracy. And accuracy is another feature that you want in a self-defense weapon. Why is that? It's because it's not just about what or who you're hitting, it's equally important as to who or what you're not hitting, because you don't want to shoot a gun and hit anything that you don't want to destroy. It's a basic rule of firearm safety and the law of self-defense. The sixth reason that the AR-15 served Kyle Rittenhouse well in Kenosha, and what the evidence at trial showed, is that he had enough ammunition to defend himself. The anti-gunners condemned the AR-15, among other reasons, for having a so-called high-capacity magazine. A magazine being the sort of the device where you put your ammunition in and you insert it into the firearm, right? That's what the magazine is. And of course, the high-capacity magazines, so-called high-capacity magazines, which mostly are standard capacity magazines, but set that issue aside, these are the types of magazines that the anti-gunners want to ban. Right? The anti-gunners say that no one needs to have more than a handful of bullets. Again, go back to Joe Biden's words at the start of this video. You don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Biden recommended that the FEMA who asked him about the firearms for self-defense go out and get a double-barrel shotgun, which gives you, again, 2 rounds, 2 shots. And again, in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, that would have been some pretty terrible advice to follow Uncle Joe on that one, because Kyle Rittenhouse would have been likely a dead duck if he had only had 2 rounds in his weapon. He survived the mob and these attacks because he had enough ammunition to fend off the multiple attackers and to discourage any new ones from joining in. And again, another key lesson for the importance of the AR-15 and so-called high-capacity magazines, which are really just standard capacity magazines for an AR-15. Finally, the Rittenhouse video, I think, proves one more point, and that is something I've emphasized in another video. You see, when it comes to protecting yourself and your loved ones and your community, perhaps, you are your own first responder, right? That night in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 2020, Kyle Rittenhouse did not have time to call 911. And if he did, they wouldn't have shown up in time, as best I could tell, right? Because even if he had called law enforcement, they weren't coming in time to save his life. And you saw how fast things occurred in the video at the trial of how Rittenhouse had to respond to save his life from the attacks that were displayed on those videotapes. Now, sure, there were police generally around in Kenosha that night. They were looking at some of the fires that were taking place, some of the riots, some of the other issues occurring. But as best I could tell, and the videotape seems to bear this out, none of them happened to be close enough to Rittenhouse when he was first chased to make a difference. And they did not seem to be anywhere in sight when a mob sent Rittenhouse falling to the ground. Now, anti-gunners do not want ordinary Americans to be able to engage in armed self-defense. That's as best I can tell what they really want. They don't want you to be able to protect yourself. They want you to be forced to call the state, the government, the police for help, right? They want you to call the police to beg for help. But the reality is, and the Rittenhouse video proves a perfect illustration of what I've been saying for many years and many others have said, you cannot count on the government to protect you in most instances when it comes to matters of life and death. Even if the government or the police are highly motivated and highly trained to try to protect your life, the reality is, as many have said, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. Based on the trial evidence that millions of Americans saw over the last few weeks, it seems to me Kyle Rittenhouse had no choice but to take matters into his own hands with his AR-15 rifle. And again, I think the video evidence proves this in spades. So let's wrap up. Here's the bottom line on the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the millions of people that just watched the trial on television. Okay, Kyle's acts of self-defense show that Joe Biden was wrong about the AR-15 in every way, not a shock. You see, Biden said that the AR-15 is harder to use, but the reality is, as we saw from the trial, that an AR-15 rifle is actually a lightweight, low recoil weapon that a 5'8", 17-year-old with minimal firearms training could use effectively to save his life from a mob. Biden also said it's harder to aim, but again, look at the videotape. The AR-15 is accurate enough that the same 17-year-old was able to fend off 3 different attackers and hit no innocent bystanders, no collateral damage. And Biden suggested that a shotgun with 2 rounds of ammo is all you need to protect yourself. But Rittenhouse had to use multiple rounds of ammunition to save himself from at least 3 attackers. So if you're not a Navy SEAL and you're just an ordinary American like I am, the AR-15 is an extremely effective self-defense tool to protect you and your family. Now, all this is probably and should be obvious from the Rittenhouse case and the trial evidence that was displayed for millions of people on their computers and televisions. But the anti-gunners, at least some of them, seem to stubbornly resist the evidence that we all saw. Take, for example, Beto O'Rourke of Texas. Now, the failed presidential candidate who infamously said, "Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s," okay? Here's how O'Rourke reacted to the Rittenhouse verdict. He said, quote, "This entire tragedy makes the case that we should not allow our fellow Americans to own and use weapons that were originally designed for battlefield use. That AR-15 has a single solitary purpose, and that is killing people as effectively and efficiently and as great a number in as little as time as possible." That's Beto O'Rourke. Really? That's what we're supposed to learn from the Kyle Rittenhouse case? And you think that's what millions of Americans really learned by watching the videotape of those attacks on Kyle Rittenhouse and how he used that AR-15 rifle to defend his life? Seriously? Well, here's what I'm going to say, both to Beto O'Rourke and to everyone else watching this video. Do yourself a favor. Go back and watch the Rittenhouse self-defense video footage yet again. And then ask yourself this. Who do you really believe? Do you believe Beto O'Rourke and his hyperbole? Or do you believe your lying eyes? If I could paraphrase, I believe, Groucho Marx. As I saw the trial and the video evidence, I saw Kyle Rittenhouse use an AR-15 rifle to great effect to defend his life from people that were attacking him. That's what I saw. And I think there are millions of Americans that saw the exact same thing that I did. And I suspect that the conclusion they're going to take away, which is the same one I did, is that the AR-15 rifle really served Kyle Rittenhouse well. And if it served him well, I suspect it will serve me well, and probably other people will conclude it will serve them well as well. I think the Rittenhouse trial has many lessons for gun owners and the Second Amendment community and for people that care about those issues. But I think one of the critical things that came out of here that hasn't got nearly enough attention is the real value of the AR-15 rifle for self-defense. And I actually think that millions of people saw what is effectively a 2-week infomercial in favor of the AR-15. And I suspect that in future litigations over AR-15 bans, and I suspect in terms of what people are going to buy for self-defense purposes in the future, I think that the demand is going to go up for AR-15s because of what happened in the Rittenhouse trial. Because whether you think he did right or wrong, I happen to think he did right, but whether you thought he did right or wrong is besides the point. The reality is that AR-15 certainly came across as an effective defensive tool, and I suspect many million Americans saw the exact same evidence that I did, and I would not be surprised if they acted upon it accordingly. So thanks again for joining me here at the Four Boxes Diner, where we serve fresh, hot Second Amendment news and analysis. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and spread the word, and we'll see you next time at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.